Yofi. Good
morning, Rabbi. How was the party last night?
Beautiful. Have a good morning. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Yerushalmi Maisres, Perek Aleph, Halacha Dalet. We're learning today Daf Ches. We left off on Daf Zayin Amid Beis by the two dots at the end of the third line before the bottom of the Amid. We're starting today first by quoting a Braisa that will give us another stage of the Gemara Malacha when it comes to grain. Ironically, grain and the Gemara Malacha of grain is the mashal that's used for all Gemara Malachas. Most people who are not learning Masechtas Maisres are not going to remember every single Gemara Malacha for every item, but they'll remember the concept of Meiruach, which is, as we said yesterday, is that after they would pile the grain, they would smooth the pile. It would make it look good. They would package it nicely. And ironically, there's going to be a Braisa that will have another Gemara Malacha, so we're going to get into that. There's another Yisoid that the Gemara will not mention today, but we have to remember to appreciate some of the Shakal V'Tarya, and that is something, a rule that we learned in Masechtas Trumos, that a person is not allowed to be ma'aser from produce that already underwent Gemara Malacha for produce that didn't yet undergo its Gemara Malacha. Now, don't forget, Chevra, if an item reaches Oynas HaMaisres and it was harvested, even though you are allowed to snack from it, even though you're not obligated to tithe it, it's not full-fledged tevel, but if someone will be tithem uma'aser, it will be effective. So there's a chiddush in this rule. In other words, even though something is not yet in its final stage, if I would remove truma and meiser from it, that will be effective. Nevertheless, we learned this in Masechta Trumos that one is not allowed to be ma'aser from produce that already had its Gemara Malacha for other produce of the same type, of the same year, that didn't yet have its Gemara Malacha. That's going to be an important base to some back and forth in today's daf, and the bulk of today's daf will be related to the rule of the Mishnah that hakitniyos misha yichbor, which means that since legumes are not cut with a knife, they are harvested by them being uprooted. So therefore, it's very common that some clods of earth come up with it. So there's a lot of dirt or earth in kitniyos. So it was common, at least the Mishnah said, some people did it, some people didn't. But those who did, they used to sift out the dirt. Now, really, the Gemara is going to add that it isn't only the sifting of the kitniyos. People would sift it somewhere above the ground, whether it is they stood and they held the utensil, but it wasn't like a tefach before the ground. It would be like our height, human height. And after the legumes would go through the sieve, they would purposefully allow it to fall all the way down to the ground. Because while it was falling down to the ground, there were some other impurities that got swept away by the air. Very much like winnowing. So between the gravity and the wind, so it wasn't only the sieve that removed, but there is some level of further purification by it falling all the way to the ground. And indeed, the Gemara says, quoting a Braisa, that when is the real Gemara Malacha from Kitniyos, not from when it went through the sieve, but from when it hit the ground. And really, we're going to have two ways of understanding it. Is it because of the wind blowing away the impurities? Is it because we need it to be settled in a place? In other words, those additional impurities that are blown away by the wind, by the little wind, is insignificant. It's simply about it being settling. And we're going to come back to the Mishnah's dinim of the wine and to the oil. It's going to be very, very interesting. And just for the record, at some time today, I would like to read, I brought with me the Rambam, Hilchas Meiser, in the Rambam, Perek Gimel, the Shisha Devarim that are koiva'as l'meiser. In other words, even though something did not yet hit its Gemara Malacha, if, for example, Shabbos comes, the fact that there is a mitzvah of Oynik Shabbos, there's some additional chashivus of eating any and all good foods on Shabbos. So even though the item objectively is not nigmar malachtoi, Shabbos is goymer its malachtoi. If you sell something, the act of the sale, and in our Gemara will correlate selling and gifting, the fact that there was an exchange of ownership, that in itself upgrades the chashivus somehow, it's in the place midrabanan. These are the shisha devarim that are koivin malachtan. We're going to go through that. If we'll have time, we're going to go to Bavli Git and Lamed Ches when the Gemara speaks about various reasons for which people lose their wealth. By us, first we have to become wealthy. First of all, we are wealthy. Let's thank God for that. But in certain areas, we're not yet
listening to the rabbi's speech.
And now we have to become wealthy with God's help. God should make us healthy. And then even when you're wealthy, just because you're wealthy today, it doesn't mean you'll be wealthy tomorrow. And Chazal give us various insights as to causes, real causes why one might lose their wealth. One of them has to do with eating what's called today bain. In other words, eating food right before Shabbos is one of the reasons why people lose their wealth. We're going to learn about this, and we'll see how this relates to our Gemara. There's going to be a lot of nuance, and a lot of nuance in the dinim that we are having in the Mishnah. We'll leave it at that. Again, it's smaller, relatively smaller dafim physically, which gives us more time to elaborate. Chevra daf zayin amid base, 3 lines before the bottom of the amid, right after Rabbi Chananya b'shem Rabbi Yechanan. That's where, no, we didn't read that yet. I take that back. Okay, so let's go. Tfua mishayis mareyach, or from mishayis marach, however you'll read it. That grain, it's not only piling up the grain, but it's when you smooth the pile. So first of all, Rabbi Chananya b'shem Rabbi Yechanan says, min din yishapar, shapir means beautiful. From when you beautify, apai means the face, means the external, the charia of the pile. In other words, the reason why smoothing of the pile is its gemar malacha, this is what I was hoping to get to yesterday, that gemar malacha, as we mentioned, if I'm planning to take it home, even after things are smooth, it's still not gemar malacha. It has to enter my home. But when it comes to selling it on the market, when it's already attractive to the most, that you will make it attractive for buyers. And that has to do, that's what he's saying, has to do with beautifying the look of the product. That's why smoothing of the pile, because it beautifies the face. It looks somehow nicer when it's evened out. Says the Gemara, how can we have this klal of Meiruach v'hatoni Rabbi Yaakov bar Sisai? He had a braisa me'ei mesai hu toyre mesagoyde, and clearly, when are you chayiv? In other words, when is it real tevel? When is it the gemar malacha? So there we have another indicator, another step, and that is mishetei aked ha'Allah. Now, Allah is a name of some sort of hoeing utensil, and the practice used to be that since you're working in the field, they had these kalim available. You don't need the hoe tool when it comes to the meiruach objectively, but they used to actually stick it into the ground, and they would pile grain around the hole. Maybe they did it to designate the location of these piles. How far should one be from the other? And after the grain would be fully surrounding the Allah, this hoe, and it would be to the level that you wanted to get it at, the farmer then would remove that stick. He would remove that tool. So the Braisa says that the removal of the tool, that is its gemar malacha. Bottom line is, not when you evenly smoothed it, not the meruach. So which one is it? Daf Ches Amud Aleph. So the Gemara answers, and this is something that we had a lot in the Mishnah, that you're right. It's not a hard and fast rule. Kan b'sheyesh b'datei l'moreach, that in our Mishnah's interpretation of meruach, meaning the smoothing of the pile, Rab Chananya, that is when you intend to do it. The smoothing of the pile was done after you remove the hoe, which makes a lot of sense, because when you remove the hoe, there's a hole in the middle of the pile. So part of the smoothing it out is to make it uniform. But the Braisa, speaking about certain farmers that they didn't smooth it out. Don't forget, guys, you did take it to the market. If you were fortunate, people came to your field. Like, what would be the point of you smoothing it out, right? If you're going to unsmooth it, I get that. So, it depends on the kan. If the she'ein data limoreach, and by the way, now you understand the Mishnah, our Mishnah, if you go back to the Mishnah also said that in a place people don't do meruach. The Mishnah says, I think, mishiyasa arema. The Mishnah says from when you make it into a pile. So now you can understand the Braisa generally elaborates more than the Mishnah. So the Braisa is saying from when you remove the hoe, that is an elaboration of the shear of our Mishnah from when you make it into a pile. Because how big is a pile? How do you know when the pile finished? Maybe you'll make the pile another inch taller and a chanami. So that's what the Braisa is saying. How do I know that the pile is done? It's in the pile. What did we learn yesterday with the basket? If you plan to fill half of the basket, then it's Gemar Malacha by half of the basket. But if you want to fill 3 baskets, it's only after 3 baskets. So how can you say Mishiyasa Arema when you make it into the pile? When did you finish making it into the pile? When? So you could say, the farmer knows the emes. He planned to end the pile. And the Braisa is saying, no, that use the removing of the hoe as the siman. But that is what the Mishnah is saying, right? Like the Mishnah said almost in all the other cases. If you're not taking off that skin, if you're not doing this, if you're not doing that, then it gave you another shiur, another critical point, which becomes its gemar malach. Okay. Now we're going through a big part of today's daf, and that is regarding the legumes hakitniyois mishayichbor. When you sift the dirt out of it, and again, the Mishnah also spoke about farmers that didn't do that. But when a person is planning to sift the dirt, that is a final. That's the gemar malach. Says the Gemara, and this is really a kasha. That's the way we'll understand it. And as we mentioned in our words of introduction, that we learned in Masechtas Truma is the rule that a person cannot legally, halachically, separate produce that already underwent Gemar Malacha for another produce that did not yet undergo Gemar Malacha. Even though all of the other rules are there, it's the same item, it's from the same year, doesn't matter. They are in 2 different phases. So now, Frekti Gemara, we did learn in a Braisa that when the Mishnah speaks about you sifting the dirt, says the Braisa doesn't mean you have to sift the dirt from all of your legumes. Aval koiver hu mixas, that if you sifted the dirt out of some of them, that alone allows you, v'toidam, you can now separate trumos from the sifted for the unsifted. Now, I just want to mention something else, and that is the din of min hamufchar, or the din of min hayafe. That's another rule. In other words, even when I am allowed to separate trumas or maisres from this pile for everything in this pile, min lechatchila, remember, I should take, the Torah says that, mikol chelboy, I should pick the apples. I'm taking 2 apples out of 100 apples for truma, and then I'm taking 9.8 apples. I should be taking the nicest ones. So that's another detail, that when you sift a little bit, so now you have some legumes that are better, they're sifted. Some of them are not sifted. So you're good. Everything has the Gemar Malacha. Elama, make sure that when you take it, don't take it from the Ra ala Yafa, take it min Yafa ala Ra. Problem is that it being sifted doesn't only make it superior in quality, it does that also. Sifting it is its Gemar Malacha. Now that we know from our Mishnah that sifting is a Gemar Malacha, so if you only sifted some of the legumes, how would you be allowed to take? Even though you're taking it min ha-kavur al she'eno cover. So what? The cover is Nigmar Malachta. The Eino cover is Eino Nigmar Malachta. You're not allowed to be trading from one on the other. That's a bomb question. It's amazing how the Braisa doesn't, the Yerushalmi, he wrote it, he just quotes a Braisa. Didn't say it's a kasha, but it's a gvaldik kasha. Oh. So, Amar Rabbi Ila, Shekein derech balabatim liois mach nisin l'toich boteihem. This is very important. That what? Gemar melacha of our Mishnah, when the Mishnah says that hakitnios mishayichboir, that's referring to people who are careful not to eat any of it when there's some dirt still in it. However, not everyone has such a high level of grading. Do you buy only by grade A? Do you also buy grade B? There are people, there are balabatim, that don't mind taking unsifted legumes into your home. And therefore, that's the whole thing we learned in the Mishnah. What did we just learn above? And if you don't smooth out the pile, then it's from the step before. The final step is the sifting, which would mean that for the people that don't mind sifting it, they don't care to sift it, then it's from before the sifting. That's exactly the Braisa, that even though you have a person that began to sift, and then he stopped, So you say that the fact that he stopped sifting it means he wanted some to be sifted, but he doesn't mind for the others to remain unsifted. His act of stopping is megaladas, that for the remainder, he doesn't need for that to happen, which means everything has its gemar malacha. That's a big chiddush. And now the Braisa wants to tell you, okay, but there's better and worse. Even though you don't mind eating the unsifted, but it's still better to have the sifted. So you have to be a toidem, mikol chel by mimenu, from the better.
Rabbi,
Yes.
Rabbi, is there a proportion of sifted to unsifted, or it doesn't matter?
It doesn't matter. In other words, really, Vlad, there are people, balabatim, that would have none of it sifted. So, in other words, the fact that you began to sift it, which means that you are identifying yourself as you belong from the community of the sifters, if you stop, you can go back to the default. Now, for that, we have to have from the Torah. That's the way Yerushalmi works. My Tama in the Bavli means what's the logic. My Tama in the Yerushalmi is what's the source. We're going to find a pasuk in Tanakh in which we speak about people eating legumes that were not sifted. By the way, it doesn't mean they ate dirt. It just means that while they were eating it with their hands, they would clean it up. So, my Tama, where do we find such a thing that be'emes sifting lavdafka? People have to sift it. A pasuk in Yeshayahu, for ha alofim, these are ox trainers. For ha ayodim, these are donkey drivers. Oiv de Adama, these are the people that work the land. People that work with the land, these are the words, is Belil Chametz Yerchelu. They eat unchanged produce. Unchanged means unsifted produce. People that, interesting. People that work with the ground, they don't find the ground to be dirty. They call the ground earth. People in the city, we call the ground dirt. We just went to a Levaya Sunday, and that's what they announced. Everyone is invited to throw some dirt, like mamish. And I was thinking, that's the emes, it's dirt. But it's lavdafka dirt. It can be earth, it can be dirt. Now, I want to share a gavaldik chap, and I heard this from Rabbi Rosner, to give him credit. And I want to say the following. If you remember, because what he did is we already had this a few times, that the Gemara made correlations between Hilchas Meisers and Hilchas Shabbos. So guys, by Boirer, which is so relevant when it comes to Hilchas Shabbos, like you go into your drawer, you want to pick socks, right? Don't take the back socks away to get your good socks. Like the big rule by Boirer is ayol. Ayol is oichel, yad la'alter. That you are allowed to take the oichel from the psoilus. You are allowed to do it with your hand, not with a keli, even on Shabbos. I'm talking about Shabbos. And la'alter, however you define la'alter, right before a meal, that type of boider is permitted. So when it comes to boider, shin yud ches, shin yud tes. So I'm going into the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch, and the Alter Rebbe is quoting a Ramah, in the Alter Rebbe shin yud tes halacha yud gimel. This is very relevant. I remember when this happened. Yayin o mayim, shehem tzululin. If you have wine or water that are already clear, muter lesananon b'mishmeres, you can put them through a sifter on Shabbos, kedei sheyu tzululin yoiser, to make them more clear. I remember where there became an issue, I think when I was in yeshiva, and the big issue. The issue is that they realized that in New York, when you open up the water, some of your water gets sifted. They sifted out the water. When you opened it up, even some people in their sinks, they would have inside the faucet, there'll be a little sifter. Boider. You have many machines. These machines that you have the water in, not the electric machines. And you get the water out, it goes through a sifter. It goes through something. How are you allowed to do that?
Does that include the aerators that they put at the end of the?
Thank you. The
that's
aerators.
A standard thing.
Yes. And the answer is, Vlad, that's based on this halacha, that if you would have consumed that water or wine, even without you making it sululin yoiser, if you would have had it before, if it was already drinkable, you are lechatchila allowed to sift it even more. I think this is gewaldig.
Sorry, how does that apply to unfiltered wine?
Same thing with wine. In other words,
Well, but they have wine that dafka is sold as unfiltered.
That's something else. That's even more. I'm saying that if you want things to be more filtered, so the din is you are allowed to filter it. You can use a keli. You're putting it through a sieve. Why? Since very good, that's a good. Since most people could drink it without it, you want to be a finicky person. You are lachatchila allowed to do it. I think that's a great.
I'm having a hard time to understand this because
I just want to speak out the correlation. Same thing over here. The fact, even though you removed some of the dirt, the fact that we find a pasuk in Yeshayahu that legumes objectively for people that are oivdei adama, they can eat it unrefined. That means it's edible. The Torah says it's edible. Even though you are making it more edible, that's not a critical point. How can that make it? That's the whole vart. But we make it subjective. It's not a perfect correlation because here we are saying that if you plan to sift it, then the Gemara Malach is when you sift it. But the moment you stop, then I go back to what the Chumash, what the Torah says in Yeshayahu. It's good without it. Yeah, I'm sorry. What were you saying, Yakir? Okay. Now, the kasha that we had yesterday regarding Hegdish is being asked in the opposite direction. What did we learn yesterday? We learned yesterday that Gemar Malacha is so important, B'negeya, the rule that if produce was biyat Hegdish, when it went through its Gemar Malacha, then you went ahead and you redeemed it, you'll never have to tithe it because of the rule that Hegdish doesn't have to be tithed. But what's the critical point? Was it biyat Hegdish when it underwent the Gemar Malacha? Okay? Now, again, I'm not going to repeat what we learned yesterday. We're asking this in the opposite direction. Let's read it inside. Kfar, kavar, b'reshus hegdish. Someone was magdish legumes. At any point, they were magdish the land. It doesn't matter. They were magdish prior to its gemar malach. And it underwent this sifting biyat hegdish. And right after it was sifted, it was redeemed. Okay, I mean, the gemar malach was biyat hegdish. Now, on one hand, we're going to say, prior to the sifting, what was the halacha? No gemar malacha. Then you can have a casual eating. We're speaking, had it not been hegdish. Had it not been hegdish, now the sifting is the gemar malacha. So the din should be, and you have to read the words, upatur. See how the Gersois confused everyone. I mean, why that's the normal, of course. So it was, the gemar malacha happened, the yad hegdish, or not. Now, why not? It's amazing. We're saying maybe for Hegdish, listen to my words. Gemar Malacha has to be a significant act. For you to have the heter that it was the Gemar Malacha was biyad Hegdish. Why would sifting not be a significant act? Because you're not doing asay toiv, you're just doing surmira. Now, the Gemara is going to right away challenge that because we learned other rules in the Mishnah that were similar. Like by the one, you're removing something. Well, it's maybe since the Gemara is smoothing the piles, you're doing something to beautify it. Here, you're not beautifying it. You're removing impurities. Removing something negative might not be significant enough for you to say, since it happened biyad hegdish, now even though you redeemed it, you're going to be exempt. That's the Gemara's question. And the Gemara is asking on the question, who told you that removing impurities is not a significant act? Why not? We learned in a Braisa. We learned this in the Mishnah. Right? Now, just for the record, when we said this when we learned the Mishnah yesterday, our Mishnah holds, this is good to remember, that with the Gemar Malacha of wine is from when you skim the Shemarim while the wine is in the boir. The boir is in the wine press. So you have the gasal yoina, tzinar, boir. Rabbi Akiva, that's the Tana, and the Braisa is following that Shita holds that since when people would remove it from the boir, after you skim the boir, and they would put it into barrels, they would still leave it for there to ferment. And while it was fermenting, more delicate sediment went up to the top, and it was skimmed again. So in the Braisa, the Gemar Malach in the Braisa is, the removing of the sediment in the barrel. Doesn't matter. But removing is also asur mirah. You're taking back the negative. And we learned befedish that if someone was magdish barrels of wine, shila v'kipa, if this step of Gemar Malacha, according to Rabbi Akiva, which is skimming it in the barrel, happened while it belonged to Hegdish, even though you redeemed it right afterwards, the Braisa says befedish that you're puttered. Skimming wine is the same of sifting legumes, right? You're not doing something to make it better, but you are removing that which is making it worse. And we make no such difference. So what's your havamina? What's the question? So the Gemara clarifies. Amar Rabbi Yudin. Again, different girsois. We're going to go with the brackets. That regarding the wine, shelo yishle velo yikve. Let's go like this. Whoever is going to drink the wine, what did we say? We said that by wine, the sediment floats to the top. So the way you're going to get to the wine is by removing it. I know you're not making the wine per se better, but you're doing a step that's really needed. If the sediment is on the top of it, you have to move it to the side. But over here, it's possible for you not to remove it at all. And my understanding of not removing it is that you can eat some of it. And we're going back to the same pasuk that we just quoted, the Amar Rabila, quoting the pasuk in Yeshayahu, and the Oivdei Adama, right? Belil chametz yerchelu. That's what the pasuk says. So that's why he asked the question. Not because removing something negative should be considered insignificant. No. But because since the fact that the Torah writes that people are able to eat legumes, even though there is some earth in it, earth is not dirt, earth is earth. So therefore, if you're finicky and you do it, so what? So for you, it's the Gemar Malacha, but to be matir hegdish, to say, it was biyad hegdish, that's a good question, and this question remains unresolved. Okay. So let's go furthermore. But Tony, we learned in the Braisa. Let's go with this rule again. Kitniyos, mishe yichboir, from when you sift it. So when you sift it, Aviv, let's speak about people doing it manually. You're standing. Just imagine you're holding the sifter in one hand. You're having the legumes in the other hand. You would put the legumes on top of the sifter. You would shake the sifter. And what would happen is that the clouds of earth would remain above and the kitnius would fall to the ground. So says the Braisa that as it's falling in the air prior to it hitting the ground, if you grabbed a couple of pieces of legumes, you can still snack of it. In other words, the real Gemar Malacha is not by the fact that it went through the sieve. The Gemar Malacha is that it rested on the ground. Avol zok the Braisa koile tu mitachas hakavara. If you catch it from right under the sieve before it hit the ground, there you are still allowed to eat it. Obviously, we're talking about casual eating, achilas arai. And there are two ways of understanding the reason behind the leniency of the Braisa daf ches amud beis. One is, like we mentioned in our intro, that of course the sieve removed, held back the larger clumps of earth. But still, some, very good, a good picture, some earth, some impurities still adhere to the legumes. Now, do all of them get blown away with the wind? Depends how windy. But don't forget, same thing of winnowing, that there is always some wind. Let's speak about when there's some wind. The legume weighs more than that impurity. So think of, so when there's a little bit of wind, the wind has enough koyach, the wind is strong enough to blow away those little impurities without it being strong enough to blow away the legume. So gravity kicks in, so the legume falls to the ground. So when it hits the ground, on the ground, it's the most pure. So the Gemar Malacha is the sifter and the going through the air. That's Rab Chizda. So Rab Chizda says the reason why the Braisa tells you are still allowed to eat it when it's coming down, because shehei michusarim l'ruach, because they lack the cleansing that happens through the ruach. Gavaldik. However, Rabbi Ila b'shem Rabbi Asa says no. First of all, he's not arguing with the Metzias. When it's flowing through the ear, some impurities get blown away. But those impurities are so insignificant. We keep on quoting a pasuk in Yeshayahu. That between prior to it being removed, post it being removed, that's not a Gemar Malacha. That's not a critical point. So why does it have to rest on the ground? Pashit, settling on the ground, let's go, lends finality to the sifting process. it's not about removing impurities. When did the sifting process end? When something is flying through the air, you didn't end yet. It's not complete. Completing is when it hit the ground. Gewaldig. I love this. This is a good machloikas. And the Gemara is going to see if this, both opinions will work in our Mishnah, both in the case of the wine and in the case of the oil. So the Gemara says, let's compare Rabbi Chizda and Abila. Let's see if it fits first with the case of the wine. And what did the Mishnah write? The Mishnah wrote, V'hayayin, in our Mishnah. What's the Gemara malach of wine? Misha yakapa, from when you skim the peels and the seeds off the top of the boir. Now, the the Gemara is not contrasting it with the Gemara malach of wine, but we are contrasting it with that which the Mishnah wrote right afterwards. What did the Mishnah write right afterwards? That even after you skim the boir, you know what's nigman malachtoi? Only the wine in the boir. But the wine that's still in the tzinoid, the wine that's still in the gasel yoina, the Mishnah says, that still remains loy nigman malachtoi wine, and you are allowed to snack or drink a little bit from it. Now, man the amar shehein michusarim nicha. Guys, nicha with an aleph, nicha with a hey, don't confuse one. The michusarim nicha means that kidneys don't need additional refinement. They don't need it. That's the second opinion, right? We only want to say that the Gemar Malacha process ended. If it's about ending the Gemar Malacha, then Nicha with an Aleph means then it's okay. Why is it okay? Because we're coming here, at least in the Havamina, with the premise that the wine that's in the Gasel Yoino and the wine that's in the Tzinoir doesn't have Shemarim, or has a very small amount of Shemarim in it. It's not going to get more refined or less refined. So if it's about it has to come to a resting state for it to be a completed process, so then it fits that the wine that's not in the boil, the very fact that it didn't come to its final resting place, that wine is loy nigman malachtoi. But man, the amar shehei michusarim leruach, but according to Rav Chizda, that by the legumes, the reason why it has to hit the ground is because when it falls onto the ground, the wind blows through it and it further refines it. My friend, wine undergoes no further refinement just because it makes sense. What you think when the wine is going down onto the boil, it gets refined? No, it doesn't. It doesn't get more refined by its descent. No, if it's about the descending of the legumes through the air, which is what refines it, which is why it has to hit the ground, you don't have that logic by the wine. So the kasha would be that once in my wine press, I skimmed the wine, Lashitas our Tana from the top of the boil, why wouldn't we say that all of the wine is Nigman Malachtoi? And the Gemara answers, that's not a kasha. Why not? Because Mechuser Hu Bishmarav. Because, don't forget, I know that the fall, the descent in itself doesn't clear out the sediments. There's no wind, there's no gravity. I get that. But wine has in it sediment. And in order for the sediment to be removed, it has to rest. When it rests, as it ferments, the sediment rises to the top. Now you are able to remove it. The wine that's not in the boil never rested enough time for its sediment to rise to the top, which means there is still sediment in it. That's why it's not fully processed. So it can fit both L'Rab Chizda and Avada to Rab Ila. And the same back and forth was with the next case in the Mishnah with the olive press. Chosev Rabbi Yamin Bar Gidoil. Here's worded as a question. Again, the question is, L'choyre Rab Chizda's understanding of the Braisa will not merge with our Mishnah. It says in our Mishnah Votaninon that once the sheben mishiated lo'uka, once the oil is in the uka and the trough, so that oil is nigman malachtoi. However, the Mishnah also said, but all of the oil that is somewhere is still in the sack. The oil that's under the memel, the millstone, those oils are still not nigman malachtoi. So again, why not? So man the amar shehein michusarin nicha. If Rabbi Ila's understanding is correct, it's not about it getting more refined, the legumes, when it's falling through the air, even though it gets more refined, but halachically it's insignificant. But it's about when do we say there is Gemar Malacha, when there is a finality to that step. When do you finalize the sifting? When it hit the ground. So you can argue when is the oil in its final stage? When it's in the uka, which means that the oil that's not in the uka, it's like it's flying through the air. It's not. It did not come to its final resting place, so that's why there's no gemar malacha that works. But according to the opinion that says that Rabbi Chizda, no, because when the legumes fall through the air, the wind blows out its impurities. No such a thing. There's no wind blowing out anything. By the oil, man the amar, the same kasha as before. It should make no difference, and therefore the kasha is l'chu'ur. According to Rabbi Chizda, once the oil of your batch went into the uka, why wouldn't we say that all of the oil is nigmar malachtoi, even the oil that's in the akel, even the oil that's under the memel, and that should not be allowed for you to smear it on your wafer or on your platter. So the Gemara says the same thing that we had by the wine. You're right. The descent in itself doesn't purify anything, but its remaining stationary in a place for enough time is necessary for its sediment to go to the bottom. What happens before it goes to the bottom? It's cloudier. What happens when you leave it sitting in the uka at I don't know how much time it takes? When the sediment goes to the bottom, the oil itself becomes clearer. The oil in the memel is not clearer. So everything fits. Everything fits. Now, before we move on, I'm happy with the time.
It sounds like if the oil settled in the bottom line, it hasn't yet separated, and then maybe it's also not Gemara Malacha.
Very good. So Danny's pointing out what the Gemara is really saying. Michael, uka is the trough in the oil press. Must be l'chayda, that it's going into the uka in itself is not the Gemara Malacha, but it's becoming clear is the Gemara Malacha. Because by the wine, it's easy. You have to remove it. And by the way, when it falls into the bar, you don't remove it right away. It has to sit there for I don't know how much time for the sediment to rise to the top. By the oil, it has to be there enough time where there is its separation, which takes time. Okay, before we go on, I just want to chazar over the Rambam. I know by Masechtas Trumos we read this twice. I don't remember where, and what daf. But look at the way the Rambam formulates it. So in the Rambam, first of all, Hilchas Meiser, Pei Gimel, and I'll go quick. We have enough time. I'm going to go Halacha Aleph Beis Gimel. Halacha Aleph is Pei She'igiu Lo'oinas HaMaisres. The Oinas HaMaisres we learned up until this Mishnah. And then V'nitlishu, and then you harvested it. But Va'adayin Lo Nigman HaMalachtan, but we didn't hit the final stage. Kegoin Tvua Sheket Sara. Not only did you harvest it, but Vidasha, you threshed it. But Va'adayin Lo Zoira Oisa V'Lo Mercha. You didn't winnow it, and you didn't smooth out the pile. Muter Lechol Mehem Achilas Arai Ad Shetigomer Malachtan. And by the way, in this chapter later, the Rambam will define, we didn't define what's called casual eating. How do you define that? Many people claim they don't eat because they everything that they're eating, they snack the whole day. But once it hits Gemar Malachta, what changes? Even aray you cannot eat. Halacha base. Look how the Rambam says. That's if you plan to merchandise it. But if you plan to take them home, even though you did Gemar Malacha, and what are we waiting for? We're waiting, these will be the words, okay, so there's something that will be koiveya it, it's going to fix it, it's going to make a chalois of tevel. The Rambam's words is achi yikavu l'maiser, and then halacha gimel ve'echad mishisha devarim koiveya l'maisers. 6 situations will obligate you to tithe it, which means from this point on, you may not eat it even achilas aray. Habayis, that's what we learned in our Mishnah. Re'iyas penei habayis, and the point of the Rambam is that re'iyas penei habayis has to be that first nigman malachtan, whatever that is, and then re'iyas penei habayis. If there wasn't nigman malachtan and it went into the house, if you brought tfu into the house in its husks, were one of the ways that people would write the subterfuge that people did. We learned this many times, not to be taidim. Gemar Malacha and Re'iyas Penei Habayis, but Re'iyas Penei Habayis is the final. Ha-mekach, mekach means selling it. We will see now in the Gemara, mekach doesn't only mean selling it, it means also gifting it, the fact that there was a transference of ownership, there was a change of ownership, it's something chashuv, something not chashuv won't change ownership. V'ho'esh, we learned this in the Mishnah. That's the whole word of the Mishnah. The Mishnah said, right, Aviv, that if you take that oil from the memel, the oil that loy nigmer malachta, you are allowed to put it on the wafer, you are allowed to put it on the tamchoy. So what did we learn in the Marav Fulda? What was the point? First of all, wafer is in itself called achilas aray. We're speaking about someone that's not having a kvius. They're eating a wafer, but oifen achilas aray, or the tamchoy, a platter. The second point, the biggest chiddush is that even though the wafer is hot, since it's not in the oven, even though the platter is hot, but it's a klei sheni, since we followed, Tanakama, even though it's klei rishon, but it's off the fire, that's the word. So you don't have fire, because something that was subjected to fire, the eish itself is koivas lamasa. That will be important for now. V'hamelach, if you salted it, V'hatruma means, like we said today, if you chose to be toidemit before the Gemar Malacha. Once you're toidemit, then you can't eat aray until you do all the other steps. You can't say, well, I never hit Gemar Malacha. I wanted to give it to the kohen because my friend was here. He's not going to be here tomorrow when I'm doing the Meruach. It doesn't work that way. Once you separated Truma, it's only Misukin when you separate all else. V'hashabbos, also for today. The day of Shabbos in itself is koivas lamasev. And then the Rambam in this chapter goes through all of the six. Now with this intro, now we'll mamash chap the Gemara. And again, I just want to quickly read. We have time. We have 4 more minutes, and it's a very small daf today.
People were bringing to their homes that they were just saving a few days. The minute it hit Shabbos, that's it.
That's correct. If I brought it home on Thursday afternoon, until Shabbos, I can snack. Bavli, Gitin, Lamed Ches, Amid Beis. So Amar Rabba, Bahani, Tlas, Mili, because of the following 3 things, Nachasei Balabatim, Minchseyon, people lose their possessions. Number 1, the sugi over there is that if you own an Evet Kanani, La'oilom Behem Tavoidu, even though there are exceptions, but the rule is you're not allowed to emancipate them. So the Mafke Avdayo Lecherusa, okay, we have within us the Nefesh HaBahamis, which is called an Eved, because Avdo Behefkeida Nicha. So when a person allows the Nefesh HaBahamis to go free, that's Beruchnius, but we're speaking about the Gashmis. Number 2, Udesaidi Nichsayu B'Shabbata, if you look after your possessions on Shabbos, so let's say you have a storage room, and you go check up on it to make sure your merchandise is okay. In other words, you're not violating Shabbos, but you're checking up on your stuff on Shabbos. And number 3, that you make your meal on Shabbos while they're learning in the Beis HaMedrash. Punkt, when they're learning, that's the Kiddush Club during the rabbi's speech. Chas v'shalom. No, maybe there's more Torah by the Kiddush Club than by the rabbi's speech, but the Beis HaMedrash, imagine a guy's kavei asuda, so they're not learning, and they're covering it over. I want to learn. It's a mitzvah to eat. These are the 3. Now, hold on a second. And he goes into actual 2 families. One of them had a fixed time, the wrong time on Shabbos to have the meal. I want to get to that. One of them was having a meal on Erev Shabbos. And both of these families lost their wealth. Now, what is the Erev Shabbos? So Rashi's teaches like this. Either, look at this, Rashi says, that they made their meal of Friday night bigger than Shabbos day, and we're not allowed to do that. The Kavod Yom has to be Koidem LeKavod Laila. By the way, that's why we have Cholent at day. So for the Chachamim Gedolim that have Cholent at night, you're ruining the whole thing. Because you have to do something during the day that makes your Kavius more Chashuv by the day than by the night. Kiddush Club by day, not by night. So that's, and the Ikadim Afarshi, I'm reading Rashi, that, remember I'm learning this, that Erev Shabbos Mamish, that was their problem. They were very wealthy. So it's because of their wealth, prior to having the night meal, they would have in the late afternoon, they would have another meal. Problem is that you fill yourself up. Avol Baha Mia Ika Isura, Sheikonis L'Shabbos Kishu Saveya Beloy Kaiva. It's not a one-off. So since they had a kavios, that's what they call today the bane. That's guaranteed to lose your wealth. If you want to lose your wealth, go to the go eat, go get full. So I'm saying all of this as a Hagdama. So this is what we were talking about. Now inside the Yerushalmi, we have still a minute. If you were eating, now what were you eating? You were eating this wafer. You were eating this tamchoy that has on it the oil. And now, aray, you're eating it. Aray doesn't make you lose your wealth. So let me take it back. If you're having just an aray, you're having just a little l'chaim. Huh? Toyamel. But you're having it right before. So that you are allowed to do. Or, very good then. Or you gave it to someone. Now, giving it to someone else is like mekach. Gifting it to someone else is like mekach. So you would think this is a big chiddush. You would think, well, now I got it. The oil didn't undergo gemar malacha, but Shabbos came in. No. Since it's put on a wafer or on a tamchoy and it's being eaten ba'oifen that it's called aray, it's amazing. Shabbos on this food does not upgrade it. How great is that? No, since the manner of eating it is informal, it can't be established. Even though you gave the wafer to your neighbor in the Bain, since it's on a wafer, the way of eating is considered so insignificant, because how can you eat on Erev Shabbos? So Shabbos won't be kaveyat for this. Then he's looking at me, Gavaldik. Rabbi Yirmiyah Savar Meimer, benosun b'chamito b'tamchoy, that this is only true because the oil was put on the wafer or on the tamchoy, which makes the whole thing considered something so insignificant that even the Shabbos echad meshisha devarim, even matana, which is mekach echad meshisha devarim, will be ineffective. Aval benosun b'tzeloiches. But if you simply gathered the oil in a jug, you didn't put it on the wafer. Of course, we'll stop with this. Of course, Shabbos is koivas. That's the din that Shabbos is koveya. The big chiddush.